18 minutes we got with Arrow. Good morning, my friend.
How's everything going with you guys?
So
Good,
far, so
Arrow.
good. Can't complain.
I feel bad for you. You got to talk to me for 18 minutes.
Yeah, but you know what? We're gonna have fun.
I no doubt, no doubt. But nobody, even my listeners, 18 minutes of listening to me is a lot. No, I appreciate it.
In a really bizarre way, do you feel like that you're taking away the mystique of Miami? Because it's like, wow, Miami, they got the drugs, they got the crime, that's really cool. And you guys take us into an area, it's like, hey, but you don't know the real story. And I love that about what you guys are doing on this podcast.
I appreciate that. You know, I don't think you can take away the mystique from Miami, or frankly from any place, because you know, cities and certainly Miami are more complicated than we could capture in just one podcast episode, or that anyone could capture in a book or a TV show or a movie. But what we're trying to do through Paradise Lost: Crime in Miami is examine Miami through the lens of the true crime that's been committed here. What does it say about our culture? What does it say about our people? What does it say about this place that some of the most heinous crimes committed in history of the United States have happened right here in sunny South Florida? And you know, we look at it through a prism of like, you know, how did this happen? How could it happen? Why did it happen? And I like to say we don't revel in the violence. We certainly cover it and tackle it head on. And I think in many ways, instead of, you know, taking the mystique away, I think maybe it makes it a little bit even more interesting, because after you listen to all of these episodes with crimes that, you know, vary from murders and the drug trade to, you know, love triangles, I think in some ways people might be like, hell, I might want to go visit South Florida. And so I guess this is my long way of saying that the tourism board owes me a check.
It's so true, because I mean, I've been to South Beach. I fell in love with South Beach. I wanted to get deeper into South Beach, and it's just there because there's something there.
Yeah, you know, I've often been thought about what is it about this place? I think that there's certainly, first of all, it's just so naturally beautiful. I mean, the skies here are stunning. It's such a green city. There's wonderful architecture. Culturally, it's so rich. Thanks to the amazing immigrant experience that we have here, folks coming from all over the world have contributed sounds and foods and languages. It is kind of a very alluring place, and it's a place that people kind of keep drawn to. So there's beautiful people and fascinating people kind of everywhere you go. But among all of that, there's also kind of these crazy folks. And it turns out that, you know, sometimes sometimes among the best of the best, it also exists the worst of the worst, and Miami's no different in that sense. But it, you know, it's certainly an appealing place. As a person who's born and raised here, I always say my favorite time is when I leave Miami. Yeah. And then my second favorite time is when I come back to it, because there's something that keeps drawing you back and back.
Yeah. Before I jumped into the podcast and really got into each one of the episodes, I was hoping that you would cover the Versace area. And the reason why is because I've been to that mansion, and it's like, it's such a place, and you felt something when you were there. When you jumped into this story about Versace, because to me, it's still a crime that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, so that's a crime that I remember all too vividly. It happened in 1997. I was, and I talk about this in the episode, you know, I was, when it happened, part of, you know, we heard was that there's this, a gay serial killer, right? And I was 17 or 18 when this happened, you know, just kind of coming out, and it was a fearful time. And then on top of that, and kind of right in your own backyard, you had like a murderer loose, and this world famous person who was murdered. And there was a heightened sense, for me, it was very personal, because there was a heightened sense of fear associated with it. We didn't know what could happen and who could be next. But it was such a complicated story, because Versace contributed so much to what the modern image of Miami was. I mean, in many ways, he really kind of spearheaded that reinvention of Miami in the 90s, right? We had just come out of the 80s cocaine wars when Miami was the murder capital of the world. and it had just kind of come through that and been reinvented itself. And now the 90s came, and you had folks like Gianni Versace who helped reinvent the image of the city as a place where celebrities came to play, where there was a constant party, where it was sexy and fun, but laid back and chill. And in a way, the murder of Gianni Versace in 1997 really kind of shifted the trajectory of the city in a really, really dramatic way. And it impacted so many different communities, including my own. It was a fascinating story, and what a privilege for us to be able to talk to somebody who was really at the epicenter of it all. Police Chief Miami Beach Richard Barreto, who was on the ground and whose law enforcement agency did such an amazing job. As he points out in that episode, a particular part of pride for him was, Andrew Cunanan committed a crime in Miami Beach and never left Miami Beach after that. And so there's something to be said about the amazing work of the Miami Beach Police Department.
Mentally, how do you keep so strong? Because you're jumping into stories that are so dark, and the way that you're sharing the story is that you're getting our emotions involved in this as well. I mean, look at the story with Linda Cooney, with the men in her life. Something kept going wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you do have to kind of compartmentalize some of these cases because the details are so harrowing when you take a step back. But I think that our approach, my co-host and co-producer Joey Dowd and I, our approach has been to look at these stories as a way of saying, what does this say about our society, about our community, right? What does it say about who we are? And so, it's the stories are certainly larger than life and crazy, and we don't shy away from any of the gory details. But I think that, moreover, we kind of look at it with kind of the curiosity of how could this have happened? Why could this have happened? and I think that the why is really kind of what keeps us from ourselves from going a little berserk with all the crazy details that we learn. Linda Cooney is a perfect example. Here's a woman who had come from another part of the country to establish a life for herself in Palm Beach, a very wealthy community, lands a wealthy husband, has kids, and goes through a acrimonious divorce where she kills her husband in point blank in front of one of her young child, and then only a few decades later is accused of. It's not accused. Only a few decades later, actually shoots the same son who witnessed her husband's death. And there's so many questions around that. I mean, it's almost, some of these cases almost are so larger than life that they're too crazy to be true, but indeed they all are.
When you build up these stories, because you're getting the sound, you know exactly how you're going to place the sound in it. Because when you podcast like this, it's not like doing the 5 o'clock news or anything like that. I mean, you've got to have our attention, keep our attention, deliver it, and then get us back. So how are you building your podcast to make sure that we keep coming back to every single episode?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I love to pull back the curtain a little bit. Well, I would first say that we don't actually approach it with a formula in mind. We actually let the interview and the research really kind of drive our storytelling. So the way that the ultimate podcast structure is, it's Joey and I narrating the crime for our listeners, and then we invite a special guest associated with it, and this can be a victim of the crime, a perpetrator, law enforcement, a journalist, a filmmaker, somebody who's really well steeped in what's going on. And through their interviews, they add a little bit more color and detail into what occurred. But we always start with kind of interviewing our key source. We do extensive research, read everything that's ever been written on the subject to get all of our background. And then we find somebody who can speak to it uniquely, and they help tell us the story. So because it's coming kind of from that really authentic place and fact checked across multiple sources, and we hear kind of somebody directly connected to the story, it ensures that there's authenticity in it, so that when after we've done that, we sit down to script it and put it together, we're able to just hone in on all the minute details that you might miss but that make a great deal of importance in the story, as well as kind of the details that everybody read in the headlines. And then we work with a great team at our partners at Sonoro to layer in music and sound design to really kind of make it an atmospheric listen that we hope is gripping as the crimes themselves.
So Miss Blanco, the godmother of Miami. Oh my God, I had no clue that this was even taking place.
Right under our very noses, right? Griselda Blanco, was known as La Madrina, which is the godmother, and that episode is called The Cocaine Godmother. And her story is a fascinating one because she was one of the few women running a huge drug operation. And really, she was, a drug. We say drug kingpin. She was a drug queenpin in a field that was dominated by men. And she wasn't just a success. She was really right at the top. And many sources indicate that she helped Pablo Escobar get his start, even though they would later become huge enemies.
Oh wow.
Her story is kind of fascinating on a couple of fronts. One is, obviously we acknowledge that what she was doing was highly illegal and highly illicit, but besides the fact that it was highly illegal and illicit, she ran an impressive organization that was bringing in billions and billions of dollars annually, and she did all of this while being a fugitive from the law and while being in a business that was completely illegal. Every aspect of it was illegal, from the selling to the importation to the consumption to the money, and she managed to build a ginormous network, with more than 600 or 700 people working under her. Of course, the other part of her story that can't be looked over is that part of the way that she did this is by ruling ruthlessly, with a penchant for vicious and gruesome brutality. And there's more than over 200 murders that are accredited to her that she either ordered or orchestrated, and in some cases committed. But it's one of those stories that you when you hear it and you hear about it the first time, you just kind of shake your head and you say, "Oh my God!" The funny thing is that she's one of those folks. She's one of those criminals that have kind of inspired the pop cultural zeitgeist. There's a Lifetime movie with Catherine Zeta-Jones from a few years ago. And right now, Netflix, I think later this year, Netflix is premiering a new series starring Sofia Vergara as Griselda Blanco. So she went back from being, famous and infamous. She's now been notorious. And so it was a great episode for us to kind of kick our show off. And we had the wonderful documentary filmmaker and my dear friend, Billy Corbin, who made a fantastic doc, Cocaine Cowboys. He kind of helped talk us through her trajectory, which is astounding.
Is there a side of your creative imagination that would like to take all of your knowledge and then put yourself on the court case as an expert witness? Dun, 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 dun.
Listen, I would say it's hard enough to be able to speak without dropping words I can't say on radio. I couldn't imagine being able to do it in a court of law. I am much more fascinated by really examining what do these things say about who we are, and about our society, right? Like, what do the true crimes kind of what do they mean about who we are as a folks, and what does our fascination with them say about who we are? So I don't know if I could be held in a court of law, but the great thing about that is I can do it in a podcast, and I could do it so that with my dear friend Joey Dowd, and we could talk about what this means as folks who come from these places, right? Who in many cases grew up streets away from where some of these things happen. God. And what does how does that affect who you are and how you become and your sensitivity to things? And I will say that while I'm never not flabbergasted by the brutality of some of these things, when I do hear about a crazy crime happening everywhere, I think that my reaction is probably a little more watered down than most, because I grew up in South Florida, where these crazy crimes seem to be the norm, not the exception. So, I think that's my very long way of saying that there's very little that shocks me these days. So I might not be great in a court.
So how did the Miami Zombie get the name?
Well, the case of Rudy Eugene is one that's really kind of fascinating. It happened a decade ago, actually 10 years ago last week.
Wow.
And what made it stand out, the name of with the kind of headline of the Miami Zombie or the Causeway Cannibal, is that Rudy Eugene attacked a homeless man named Ronald Popo, and the attack was quite vicious in that he literally chewed off a large part of his face.
Goodness.
And so much so that Mr. Popo lost both of his eyes and something like 75% of his face. And that's the kind of thing that you really only hear in horror movies, right? Or in gory stories that are made up. And here's something that happened in actuality. And as often is the case, folks in looking for an answer drew a number of conclusions. I remember voodoo came up because Mr. Eugene was a Haitian immigrant, or the child of Haitian immigrants. Voodoo was one of the first things. And then the term bath salts, the street drug known as bath salts or flaca, those kind of came up. And oftentimes what we see with some of these stories is that we just get the headlines, right? We just get what's on the 5 o'clock news or what makes the front page of the newspaper the next day, and that's all you ever learn. So for this one, we really wanted to dig more because that's not normal. You don't hear a ton about people just on drugs who go and attack someone, right? And so this episode is really interesting to us, for one, because we had the privilege of speaking with Markinson, Mr. Eugene's brother, who the family has very, very rarely spoken to the media, and we had the privilege of speaking to him. What does the effects of the crimes his brother committed have on the family and on the community, but also get to the kind of more serious questions, like what could have caused this. And in essence, this episode is ultimately it's about this horrific crime and all that happened to it, but it's also a question about mental health and about justice that isn't always colorblind. So that's it's actually one that I'm really, really proud of, because I think that it's helping us really kind of get it behind the headlines into the heart of what is a very complicated thing. Because I think in most of the crime cases we hear about, they all tend to be a little bit more complicated than just what we see on the 11 o'clock news.
Yep. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's such a kind thing to say. And thank you all so much for listening. Check out Paradise Lost, Crime in Miami.
Absolutely. You be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you so much. You too, Arrow.